Irvin Patterson was 41 years old and worked as a security systems technician in Minneapolis. Everyone in the ballroom believed he had just been exposed as a cheating husband. He drove an old Ford Ranger, packed his own lunches, and still wore work boots to events that required dress shoes. What they didn't know was that Irvin understood surveillance systems better than anyone there. Then Vanessa slid a stack of photographs across the banquet table, and one tiny detail made his stomach turn cold. "Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you like slow burn stories where facts eventually catch up to lies, make sure you subscribe. Tomorrow's story might make you question everything people call evidence." The room stayed silent for 3 long seconds. Not the comfortable silence of a charity gala. Not the silence of people listening. This was the silence of judgment, the kind that settles over a room before a verdict has even been earned. Irvin Patterson sat at the center table of the North Star Grand Hotel ballroom and watched faces change around him. A minute earlier, people had been laughing over wine glasses and discussing fundraising goals for the upcoming winter campaign. Now they were staring. Some looked shocked. Others looked disappointed. A few looked almost satisfied. Vanessa Patterson remained standing beside the table. Her posture was straight, her expression carefully controlled. The stack of photographs lay spread across the white linen cloth. The image was simple. Irvin, a hallway, a young woman, close enough to suggest something, far enough to leave room for imagination. And imagination was doing most of the work. Someone near the back whispered. Another guest leaned toward his wife. A third person quietly picked up a phone. The story had already started traveling. Irvin looked at the photo again, not because he doubted what had happened, because he wanted to understand how carefully it had been arranged. The timestamp section had been removed, deliberately, cleanly. Someone had cropped it before printing. That detail sat in his mind while the rest of the ballroom reacted. "Vanessa," one woman finally said softly, "I'm so sorry." Several heads nodded. Another voice followed. "Nobody deserves that." Irvin recognized the speaker, a corporate attorney named Michael Reeves. 2 hours earlier, Michael had been discussing golf courses with him. Now he wouldn't even make eye contact. Interesting. The evidence had not changed, only the story around it. Vanessa slowly shook her head. "I tried to keep this private." The statement landed exactly where it was supposed to. People respected restraint, especially when it appeared reluctant. "I didn't want everyone to know," she continued. "But after months of lies, I couldn't stay quiet." Months. Irvin noticed that word immediately. Months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. The accusation had already expanded. The original photograph had not even been questioned yet. But now the narrative included a timeline. The room accepted it without hesitation. Irvin remained seated. That seemed to bother people more than if he had exploded. Anger would have made sense. Silence made them uncomfortable. One guest finally turned toward him. "Are you going to say anything?" Irvin looked at the man, a dentist named Stephen Brooks. They had attended the same neighborhood cookouts for nearly 7 years. "I don't think anything I say right now would matter." The answer created another wave of whispers. Several people interpreted his calmness as guilt. He could see it happening. Humans often did that. They expected innocence to be loud. They expected truth to fight for attention. But Irvin spent his professional life around evidence. Evidence never shouted. It simply waited. The evening unraveled quickly after that. Conversations broke into clusters. People stopped speaking when Irvin walked near them. Several guests approached Vanessa. Nobody approached him. By 10 o'clock, the anniversary celebration had effectively become a public trial, without a judge, without rules, without facts, only emotion, only assumptions. Around him, crystal glasses reflected the ballroom lights. The jazz quartet continued playing in the corner despite the tension. Hotel staff moved quietly between tables. Life continued. Only Irvin's had suddenly stopped. As he stood and reached for his jacket, he noticed another detail. The woman in the photograph, Olivia Grant, one of the hotel's bartenders. He had spoken to her exactly once that evening, less than 30 seconds. She had pointed him toward a hallway after he asked where a restroom was located. That was it. Nothing more. Nothing remotely inappropriate. Yet somehow, that brief interaction now appeared to be the center of a scandal. A planned scandal. The thought settled heavily in his chest. Not because he was frightened, because he was beginning to see structure. Random accusations rarely contained this many prepared elements. The photograph, the cropped timestamp, the immediate sympathy, the confidence, the audience. This felt rehearsed, carefully, professionally, as if the outcome had been expected. Outside the ballroom, the hotel corridor felt cooler, quieter. The thick carpet muted every footstep. Irvin walked toward the elevators alone. Behind him, he could still hear fragments of conversation. His name floated through the hallway, never loudly, never directly, but enough to know the damage had already begun. His phone vibrated. A message appeared. Ethan Caldwell, his oldest friend. They had known each other since community college. The message contained only one sentence. What the hell happened? Irvin stared at the screen, then typed, "I don't know yet." A minute later, another message arrived. Is it true Irvin read the words twice? Not because they hurt, because they arrived faster than he expected. Even Ethan wasn't asking what happened. He was asking whether it was true. The accusation had already become the starting point, not the question. The elevator doors opened. Irvin stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected his tired face. His charcoal suit looked slightly outdated compared to the custom-tailored jackets downstairs. Vanessa had often complained about that, about the truck, about the boots, about the way he never seemed interested in impressing people. At the time, those complaints had sounded small. Tonight, they felt different. The elevator descended, floor by floor, level by level, as if carrying him away from a life that had already ended. When he reached the parking garage, his phone buzzed repeatedly. Notifications, one after another. A neighborhood group chat, a church volunteer chat, a charity committee chat, then silence, because he was suddenly removed from all three, one after another. No explanations, no questions, just removal. Irvin stared at the screen, then locked the phone. His old Ford Ranger sat beneath a concrete support column. The truck looked exactly as it had that morning. Faded paint, small dent above the rear tire, tool bag behind the passenger seat. Ordinary, reliable, unimpressive. He climbed inside, started the engine, and drove home through downtown Minneapolis. The city lights reflected across the windshield. Traffic remained light. The entire drive took 21 minutes. When he finally pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong immediately. The porch light was off. Vanessa always left it on. Always. Irvin stepped out, walked toward the front door, pulled out his phone, opened the smart lock application, pressed unlock. Nothing happened. He tried again. Error message, access revoked. For several seconds he simply stared at the screen. Cold air moved through the quiet neighborhood. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A television flickered behind a window across the street. Inside the house, every light remained dark. Vanessa had already removed him. Not tomorrow, not next week, not after a conversation. Already. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Someone had prepared for this night long before the photographs ever touched that banquet table. And standing alone on his own front porch, locked out of his own house, Irvin understood one thing. The accusation was never the beginning. It was the final step of a plan that had started much earlier. Irvin sat in his truck until nearly 2 in the morning. The engine was off. The neighborhood was quiet. The house stood 30 feet away, dark and unreachable. A place he had helped pay for. A place he had repaired. A place where every cabinet hinge, every light fixture, every security sensor had passed through his hands at some point. Now he couldn't even open the front door. He leaned back in the driver's seat and looked through the windshield. No anger. Not yet. Just questions. Questions were more useful. Questions led somewhere. Anger rarely did. At 2:17 a.m., a light turned on in the upstairs bedroom. A silhouette moved behind the curtain. Vanessa. Irvin watched for a moment, then started the truck. 10 minutes later, he was driving toward Lake Harriet. The city was nearly empty. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement from an earlier rain. A few delivery trucks moved through downtown Minneapolis. The world kept moving. Only his life seemed frozen. By 3 o'clock, he was parked near the lake. He reclined the seat as far as it would go. The truck wasn't comfortable. The heater clicked occasionally. Cold air slipped through the door seals. But exhaustion eventually won. When morning arrived, sunlight was pushing through the windshield. Irvin opened his eyes and immediately remembered everything. The photographs, the whispers, the locked door. Nothing had been a dream. His phone showed 14 unread messages. Most came from people asking versions of the same question. Some were careful, some were direct. A few sounded almost excited. Nobody asked whether he needed help. Most simply wanted details, information, confirmation, the modern version of standing around a car accident. Irvin ignored them all. Instead, he drove to a small coffee shop near Uptown. He ordered black coffee and sat by the window. At 8:12 a.m., his phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of his supervisor, Greg Lawson, operations manager, Twin Cities SecureTech. Irvin answered immediately. "Morning, Greg." The pause on the other end lasted longer than normal. "Irvin?" Another pause. "You got a minute?" That told him everything. Good news never started that way. "Sure," Greg exhaled. "We received a complaint this morning." Irvin stirred his coffee. Anonymous, of course. "What kind of complaint?" "Conduct." There it was. The accusation had moved faster than expected. The gala had ended less than 12 hours earlier. Already somebody had contacted his employer. Greg sounded uncomfortable. "Normally, I wouldn't even mention it, but it referenced a public incident and claimed it could impact client trust." Irvin looked through the coffee shop window. People crossed the street carrying laptops and backpacks. Normal lives, normal mornings. Meanwhile, someone was actively dismantling his. "What exactly was said?" Greg hesitated. "That you were involved in inappropriate behavior during a charity event." Interesting. Not cheating. Not adultery. Behavior. The language sounded deliberate, professional, legal. Someone had chosen those words carefully. "I understand," Irvin said. Greg lowered his voice. "Off the record. Sure. I don't believe anonymous complaints." Irvin appreciated that, more than Greg probably realized. "But HR has to document it," Greg continued. "Just letting you know." After the call ended, Irvin remained still. Another piece. Another step. The pressure wasn't accidental. The goal wasn't embarrassment. The goal was isolation. Reputation, employment, marriage, everything at once. Someone wanted maximum damage. His phone buzzed again. This time the name surprised him. Ryan Whitaker, Vanessa's older brother. Irvin stared at the screen before answering. "Ryan?" "Morning." The voice sounded unusually calm, almost friendly. "I heard things got ugly last night." Irvin waited. Ryan continued. "Look, I don't want this turning into a circus." There it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern. Management. Control. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking you to leave quietly." The words landed with surprising precision. Not defend yourself. Not explain. Leave. Quietly. Ryan continued speaking. "Vanessa's hurting." Irvin looked down at his coffee. The cup remained untouched. "Interesting. What does that mean?" "It means I spent the night in my truck because I got locked out of my own house." Ryan didn't respond. For a second, only silence filled the line. Then came the sentence Irvin would remember later. "You should think carefully about how much damage you want to cause." The call ended shortly afterward. Irvin sat motionless. That statement stayed with him. Not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded prepared, as if Ryan already expected evidence to appear, as if someone knew there was something worth hiding. By noon, Irvin was sitting inside his truck again, this time in a parking lot overlooking the Mississippi River. His mind kept returning to the same detail: the photograph, the hallway, the location. North Star Grand Hotel, a building he knew unusually well. Years earlier, before joining Twin Cities SecureTech, Irvin had worked as part of a consulting team that reviewed portions of the hotel's security infrastructure. Not the entire system, but enough to understand coverage patterns, enough to understand blind spots, enough to know something didn't fit. The hallway shown in the photograph wasn't random. People didn't accidentally end up there. The more he thought about it, the less the image made sense. By early afternoon, he had made a decision. He opened his contacts, scrolled down, and selected a name he hadn't called in nearly 3 years. Lauren Bishop. The phone rang twice. Lauren speaking? It's Irvin Patterson. Silence, then recognition. Irvin. Hi. I heard about last night. Of course she had. Everybody had. What can I do for you? She asked. Irvin looked across the river. I need information. Another pause. What kind of information? The North Star Grand. Lauren's voice immediately became more careful. You know I can't release footage. I'm not asking you to. What are you asking? I need to understand the layout. Several seconds passed. Then Lauren sighed. When can you meet? An hour later, they sat inside a quiet diner near downtown Minneapolis. Lauren Bishop looked exactly as Irvin remembered. Professional. Direct. No wasted movement. No wasted words. After ordering coffee, she listened while Irvin explained everything. The photographs, the accusation, the missing timestamp, the growing campaign against him. Lauren didn't interrupt. When he finished, she folded her hands. The photo bothers you? Yes. Why? Because whoever took it wanted that exact angle. Lauren nodded slowly. The answer seemed to interest her. Then she reached into her briefcase and removed a notepad. She drew a rough floor diagram. Ballroom, main corridor, elevators, service hallways, staff access routes. Irvin studied it carefully. His instincts immediately activated, years of security work returning. He traced several routes mentally, then stopped. Something appeared, a memory, small but important. His eyes lifted toward Lauren. The west hallway. Lauren looked at him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, she nodded. You remember? Irvin's pulse slowed. That was never a good sign. Whenever his pulse slowed, it meant his brain was connecting pieces. The west hallway camera, he said quietly. Lauren leaned back. Most guests never knew it existed. It wasn't included on public floor maps. It monitored a service access corridor used primarily by hotel staff. And according to hotel policy, its recordings were archived longer than most guest area footage. Lauren stared directly at him, then delivered the sentence that changed everything. That camera would have seen the entire hallway. Irvin felt something shift. For the first time since the photographs appeared, a path forward became visible. Not proof, not yet, but possibility. And sometimes possibility was enough. For the first time since the anniversary gala, Irvin Patterson slept indoors. Not in a bed, not in a house. Inside a small budget motel near Interstate 35W. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. A humming air conditioner rattled against the wall. A truck stop glowed outside the window. None of it mattered. His attention remained fixed on a single photograph. The same photograph Vanessa had pushed across the banquet table. The same image that had turned friends into strangers in less than an hour. The photograph sat beside a legal pad under the yellow motel lamp. Irvin studied it again, and again, and again. Most people looked at pictures emotionally. They saw stories. They saw implications. They saw what they expected to see. Irvin looked differently. Years spent working with surveillance systems had trained him to separate facts from assumptions. A camera only captured what was inside its frame. The problem was everything outside the frame. That was where manipulation lived. At midnight, he placed the image under the brightest section of the lamp. The hallway lighting reflected off the glossy paper. Something caught his attention. A shadow, small, barely noticeable, positioned near the edge of the cropped area. Irvin leaned closer. The shadow didn't belong to him. It didn't belong to Olivia Grant either. The angle was wrong. The height was wrong. Whoever had taken the photograph had been standing farther down the hallway than he initially thought. That meant the image wasn't spontaneous. Someone had chosen the position. Someone had waited. Someone had expected him to walk through that corridor. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Because accidents didn't require preparation. This did. The next morning, he drove to a UPS store in Bloomington. Not because he needed shipping services. Because he needed a large format printer. By 10 o'clock, copies of the photograph covered a work table in one of the rental workstations. He enlarged the image, marked shadows, measured distances, compared hallway dimensions using public hotel diagrams. Several customers walked past and glanced curiously at the growing collection of notes. Irvin ignored them. Piece by piece, he began reconstructing the scene. A manager from the store eventually approached. "Working on a project?" Irvin looked up briefly. "Something like that." The manager smiled politely and left. 3 hours later, Irvin had filled 8 pages with observations. Most weren't dramatic. Small details rarely were. But small details created larger truths. The wall sconces, the floor pattern, the direction of the light, the placement of Olivia's left shoulder. Every observation pointed toward the same conclusion. The image had been carefully selected, not discovered. Selected. His phone buzzed. A message from Ethan Caldwell. The first communication since the night of the gala. "How are you holding up?" Irvin stared at the screen. For several seconds he considered not responding. Then he typed. "Still standing." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Eventually, Ethan sent only one sentence. "People are saying a lot of things." Irvin looked at the message. That sentence irritated him more than outright condemnation, because it was passive, comfortable, safe. People are saying. Nobody ever owned the accusation. Nobody ever owned the damage. The crowd simply became a weather system. Everyone participated. Nobody accepted responsibility. He placed the phone face down and returned to his notes. By late afternoon, another pattern emerged. The timeline. The photograph itself contained no visible time information. The timestamp section had been removed. But other clues remained. Reflections, lighting conditions, the position of service door indicators. Those details suggested the image had been taken during a very narrow window, a window that could potentially be verified, if the footage still existed, if the logs still existed, if nobody deleted them first. That thought pushed him into motion. At 5:30 p.m., he called Lauren Bishop. She answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." "Maybe." Irvin explained the shadow, the camera position, the hallway geometry. Lauren listened carefully. When he finished, she remained quiet for a moment. "You're thinking somebody was waiting?" "Yes." "Then you're probably right." Her certainty surprised him. "What makes you say that?" Lauren sighed. "Because random photographs rarely survive long enough to become evidence." "What do you mean?" "They survive when someone plans to use them." Another piece, another observation, another reason not to rush. The conversation ended after a few minutes. Irvin spent the evening organizing documents, creating folders, saving screenshots, building timelines. Not because he knew exactly where things were headed, because preparation always mattered, especially when emotions were running high. Around 8 o'clock, another message arrived, this time from Vanessa, the first direct communication since the gala. The message was brief. "You should cooperate with the attorneys." Nothing else. No greeting. No explanation. No discussion. Just instruction. Irvin read it twice, then locked the screen. The wording bothered him. Not cooperate with my attorney. Not cooperate with me. The attorneys, plural, as though an entire process was already underway, as though decisions had already been made. 2 hours later, someone knocked on the motel room door. Irvin wasn't expecting anyone. He looked through the peephole. A courier, holding an envelope. The package required a signature. After the courier left, Irvin sat at the small desk and opened it carefully. The return address belonged to a law firm in downtown Minneapolis. The document inside was 23 pages long. Legal separation paperwork. His eyes moved steadily across the first page. Petitioner Vanessa Patterson. Respondent Irvin Patterson. The allegations began immediately. Adultery, emotional cruelty, breach of marital trust, pattern of deception. The language was formal, cold, precise. But what caught his attention wasn't the accusation itself. It was the confidence. The document read as if guilt had already been established, as if facts were unnecessary, as if the outcome had already been chosen. Irvin continued reading, page after page, claim after claim. Then he stopped. A small detail appeared in paragraph 14. Most people would have missed it. A date, specific, precise. According to the filing, Vanessa claimed concerns about infidelity had begun nearly 3 months before the gala. Irvin read the sentence again. 3 months. His eyes narrowed, because that timeline created a problem, a significant one. 3 months earlier, he and Vanessa had attended a non-profit fundraising retreat in Duluth. The trip had required shared travel records, shared accommodations, shared schedules. The allegation didn't fit reality. Not completely, not cleanly. The inconsistency was small, but it existed, and small inconsistencies often led somewhere. He flipped through the remaining pages. More accusations, more assumptions, more conclusions. Very little evidence. Eventually, he placed the documents on the desk. The motel room had grown dark. Outside, traffic moved steadily along the interstate. Headlights swept across the curtains. Irvin sat quietly. Not defeated, not angry, thinking. The legal filing wasn't merely a response to events. It was part of the structure, part of the plan. The photographs, the gossip, the employer complaint, the lockout, now the legal documents. Everything connected. Everything moved in sequence. Someone had built this carefully, which meant something else. Carefully built stories usually contained carefully hidden weaknesses. And somewhere inside 23 pages of accusations, one cropped photograph, and a ballroom full of assumptions, there was almost certainly a mistake. The question was whether he could find it before the damage became permanent. Then his phone vibrated. A new email appeared. Sender Lauren Bishop. Subject line West Hallway. Archive inquiry. Irvin opened it immediately. The message contained only 2 sentences. We need to talk tomorrow morning. The retention records don't match what they should. Irvin arrived at the North Star Grand Hotel at 7:15 the next morning. The lobby looked exactly as it had 100 times before. Marble floors, tall windows, fresh flowers near the front desk, business travelers rolling suitcases toward the elevators. Nothing about the building suggested it was quietly holding the most important evidence of his life. Lauren Bishop was already waiting in a corner booth inside the hotel's ground floor cafe. She looked tired. That immediately caught Irvin's attention. Lauren wasn't the type to look tired. She was organized, precise, controlled. The kind of person who usually appeared 2 steps ahead of every problem. This morning felt different. She slid a folder across the table. I checked the archive records. Irvin sat down. What did you find? Lauren glanced around before answering. Something strange. That wasn't the word he wanted. Strange usually meant uncertainty. He needed facts. Lauren opened the folder. Several pages contained audit reports and retention logs, rows of dates, system records, technical notes, the kind of paperwork most people never looked at. Irvin scanned the documents. Then he saw it. A gap. One specific archive request had been made 3 days after the anniversary gala. Not unusual by itself. Hotels received requests constantly. Insurance claims, lost property incidents, security reviews. The unusual part was who requested it. The request came from outside legal counsel representing Vanessa Patterson. Irvin looked up slowly. Lauren nodded. Exactly. The gala had happened less than 72 hours earlier. Vanessa's attorneys had already contacted the hotel. Already, before any formal divorce proceedings had begun. Before most people even knew lawyers were involved. The timing bothered him. A lot. Did they request footage? Lauren shook her head. No. Then what? They requested confirmation that footage existed. Irvin leaned back. That was worse. Much worse. People asked for footage when they wanted evidence. People asked whether footage existed when they were trying to determine what evidence might survive. The distinction mattered. Lauren continued. Whoever made that request knew enough to ask specific questions. Specific how? The west hallway. For several seconds, neither spoke. The waitress refilled coffee cups. Business travelers walked past. The world remained ordinary. Meanwhile, a much larger picture was beginning to emerge. Someone knew about the hallway. Someone knew cameras existed there. Someone knew the footage could become important. And someone was concerned enough to start asking questions almost immediately. Irvin closed the folder. What happens to footage now? Lauren answered instantly. Nothing. What do you mean? I locked the archive. That got his attention. You did what? Lauren met his eyes. After our conversation yesterday, I initiated preservation procedures. Now Irvin understood why she looked tired. Preservation procedures created paperwork, approvals, internal reviews, chain of custody requirements, a lot of responsibility. Lauren had effectively protected evidence before anyone officially requested it. Thank you. She dismissed the gratitude with a small wave. Don't thank me yet. That sentence was rarely good news. Lauren slid another document toward him. A retention chart, camera numbers, archive dates, storage locations. Irvin studied it carefully. The west hallway camera still existed. Its footage remained intact. So did the elevator records, the keycard logs, the garage surveillance system, the ballroom entry logs. Every system generated timestamps. Every timestamp generated a timeline. And timelines were difficult to manipulate, especially when multiple systems agreed with each other. For the first time in days, Irvin felt a small shift in his chest. Not relief, something more useful. Direction. At 10 o'clock, he left the hotel and drove downtown. The next step required professional help. Not friends, not emotions, not social media. A lawyer. The office of Rebecca Collins occupied the 7th floor of an older brick building near Hennepin Avenue. No giant reception area, no expensive artwork, no attempt to impress. Just practical furniture and organized files. Irvin liked the place immediately. Rebecca herself looked equally practical. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, minimal small talk. The kind of attorney who seemed more interested in facts than performance. After introductions, she listened. For nearly 40 minutes. The photographs, the accusations, the employer complaint, the locked house, the hallway camera, the archive request, everything. She interrupted only twice, both times to clarify dates. When he finished, she folded her hands. You've done something very smart. Irvin raised an eyebrow. What? You haven't reacted. He considered that. I'm not sure it feels smart. It is. Rebecca leaned forward. The biggest mistake innocent people make is trying to win arguments. And? You don't need arguments. She tapped the folder. You need records. That sounded familiar, almost identical to how security investigations worked. Witnesses mattered, but records mattered more. Rebecca spent the next hour explaining the process. Preservation notices, evidence requests, chain of custody, formal discovery. Everything had rules. Everything had procedures. Everything had to be done correctly. Otherwise, good evidence could become unusable. By lunchtime, Rebecca had already begun drafting documents. The first preservation letters would go out immediately. One to the hotel, one to the valet company, one to the event planner, another to any vendor connected to the gala. Each letter carried the same message. Preserve everything. Delete nothing. Alter nothing. Irvin watched her work. Efficient, methodical, unemotional. Exactly what he needed. Around 3 in the afternoon, Rebecca called him back into her office. She pointed toward a legal document. "There's something else." "What?" "The accusations." Irvin sat down. Rebecca slid Vanessa's filing across the desk. "I've read it 3 times, and the timeline doesn't work." His attention sharpened immediately. Rebecca highlighted several sections. Vanessa claimed concerns about infidelity had existed for months. She claimed suspicious behavior had escalated over time. She claimed multiple incidents had occurred before the gala. Rebecca tapped a specific date. "Where were you here?" Irvin looked, then answered without hesitation. "Duluth." "Certain?" "Very." Rebecca nodded. "Good." She pointed at another date. "This one." "Working overnight at Mayo Clinic's Rochester campus security upgrade." Rebecca smiled slightly, not because the answer solved everything, because it created verification opportunities. Travel records, work orders, invoices, access logs, independent documentation, the kind of evidence that existed outside personal testimony. She marked another section, then another, then another. By the time they finished, 6 separate claims appeared questionable. Maybe more. Rebecca organized everything into a growing evidence chart. The visual impact surprised even Irvin. A week earlier, he had looked like a man trapped beneath a mountain of accusations. Now small cracks were beginning to appear in that mountain. Not enough. Not yet. But enough to matter. The afternoon passed quickly. Emails were sent, requests filed, records preserved. The process had officially begun. For the first time since the gala, Irvin wasn't reacting. He was building. Slowly, carefully, brick by brick. At 11:48 p.m., his phone rang. Rebecca Collins. He answered immediately. "You found something." The silence on the other end lasted 2 seconds. Then Rebecca spoke. Her voice sounded different, more focused, more energized. The voice of someone who had discovered an important detail. "Irvin." "What is it?" "I spent the evening comparing timestamps." His pulse slowed. Whenever his pulse slowed, it meant his mind was preparing for information. Rebecca continued. "The ballroom records. The hallway records. The elevator logs. The timelines don't support Vanessa's version." Irvin stood from the motel desk. "What exactly do you mean?" Another pause. Then Rebecca delivered the sentence that changed everything. "I mean that according to the available system records, she couldn't have witnessed what she claims she witnessed." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside traffic moved along the interstate. Inside, every sound seemed distant. Because if Vanessa wasn't where she claimed to be, then the foundation of the accusation had a serious problem. Rebecca wasn't finished. "In fact," she said carefully, "the record suggests she may have been somewhere else entirely." Irvin tightened his grip on the phone. The investigation had finally moved beyond questions. Now it was beginning to uncover contradictions, and contradictions had a way of leading toward the truth. The brunch took place on a Sunday, 10 days after the anniversary gala, 9 days after the photographs, 8 days after Irvin Patterson had been locked out of his own house. The venue was a popular restaurant in Minneapolis's North Loop district. Exposed brick walls, tall windows, expensive cocktails. The kind of place where people discussed investments over avocado toast and called it casual. Irvin wasn't there. He learned about the gathering later, through screenshots, forwarded messages, fragments of conversations, digital footprints left behind by people who assumed he would never see them. By that point, his temporary motel room had become something of a command center. Legal files covered the desk. Timeline charts occupied one wall. Receipts, emails, and printed records sat organized in labeled folders. The room looked less like a place to sleep and more like an investigation office. Around noon, his phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. The attachment contained 3 screenshots. No explanation, no greeting, just screenshots. Irvin opened the first one. The group chat was called Sunday Circle. 23 members, almost everyone from Vanessa's social network. Business owners, doctors, fundraisers, attorneys, church volunteers, people who had once greeted him warmly at cookouts and holiday dinners. Now they were discussing him as if he weren't human. Vanessa had written several paragraphs. The tone was careful, controlled, crafted. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't insulting him. That made the messages more effective. People trusted calm accusations. The first message read, "I've stayed quiet for a long time. I hoped things would improve. Unfortunately, they didn't." The next one, "Nobody deserves to discover the truth the way I did." Then another, "I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing it because people keep asking what happened." Irvin stared at the screen. Interesting. Nobody was forcing Vanessa to continue. The story was being maintained intentionally, expanded intentionally. The accusation had become a narrative, a public one. He continued reading. Several people immediately offered support. One woman called Vanessa brave. Another called her strong. Someone wrote that they had always suspected something felt off about Irvin. That comment almost made him laugh. Always suspected. People loved rewriting history. Once a conclusion appeared, memories rearranged themselves to support it. The quiet husband became suspicious. The introverted man became secretive. The private person became dishonest. Facts mattered less than perception. The second screenshot showed more of the conversation. One message stood out. Michael Reeves, the same attorney who had avoided eye contact at the gala. His response was brief. "If you need witness statements, I'm happy to help." Witness statements. Irvin leaned back in his chair. Nobody had witnessed anything. Not a single person. There was one photograph, one interpretation, and now volunteers were offering testimony. Human beings were remarkable sometimes. The third screenshot revealed something else, a discussion about his employment. Someone asked whether Twin Cities SecureTech knew. Another person claimed employers should be informed about character issues. Character issues. Irvin closed the image. His expression remained unchanged, but his jaw tightened slightly. That tiny movement was often the only outward sign of anger. His reputation wasn't merely being questioned anymore. It was being circulated, packaged, distributed, like a product. His phone rang shortly afterward. Rebecca Collins. "You got the screenshots?" "Yes." "What do you think?" Irvin looked at the documents spread across the motel desk. "I think they're trying to create witnesses." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she answered, "Exactly." That confirmation mattered, because it meant he wasn't imagining patterns. The strategy was becoming visible. The more a story repeated, the more credible it appeared, especially among people who wanted to believe it. Rebecca continued, "Keep everything." "I already am." "Good." She paused. "How are you holding up?" The question surprised him, not because it was difficult, because so few people had asked it. Irvin considered the answer carefully. "I think I'm getting used to disappointment." The line remained silent for a second. Then Rebecca changed the subject, maybe deliberately. "Good news." That got his attention. "We received confirmation from the valet company." Irvin sat forward. "And the records still exist." His pulse slowed, a sign that his brain was shifting into analysis mode again. "What records?" "Vehicle movement logs." Now things became interesting. Most people paid little attention to valet systems. Security professionals didn't. Valet operations created timestamps, arrival times, departure times, ticket numbers, vehicle transfers, data, lots of data. Rebecca continued. "We requested preservation. They complied." "What does that give us?" "Maybe nothing." Then she added, "Or maybe everything." The conversation ended shortly afterward, but the information stayed with him. Every system seemed to tell part of a story. Hotel cameras, elevator logs, keycard records, valet records. Each source existed independently. That mattered. Independent systems were difficult to manipulate simultaneously. The truth tended to survive inside overlapping records. Around 4 in the afternoon, another message arrived, this time from Ethan Caldwell. The message was simple. "Can we talk?" Irvin stared at the screen. Several seconds passed. Then he agreed. They met that evening at a small sports bar near St. Louis Park. The place was quiet. A baseball game played silently above the bar. Most customers focused on their food. Neither man ordered alcohol. Ethan looked uncomfortable almost immediately. Not guilty. Uncomfortable. The difference mattered. "How bad is it?" Ethan finally asked. Irvin knew what he meant. Not the marriage, the reputation, the social damage. "The story's growing." Ethan nodded. He looked down at the table, then spoke carefully. "People really believe it." There was no cruelty in the statement, only honesty. Irvin appreciated honesty, even when it hurt. "I know." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't want to ask." "But you did." "Yeah." A small silence followed. Then Ethan looked directly at him. "Tell me the truth." Irvin held his gaze. The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without emotion. "It isn't true." The words sat between them, simple, direct, no explanation, no performance, just truth. Ethan stared for several seconds, as if searching for something, a crack, a hesitation, a sign of uncertainty. He found none. Eventually he nodded once, then looked away. The conversation drifted elsewhere after that. Work, sports, the weather. Neither man returned to the accusation. When they finally left the restaurant, Ethan shook his hand, then drove away. No promises, no declarations of support, nothing dramatic, just uncertainty. And somehow that felt worse, because uncertainty could eventually become abandonment. Back at the motel, Irvin sat alone beneath the yellow desk lamp. The room was quiet. Outside, traffic moved steadily through the night. He reviewed documents until nearly midnight. Then his phone vibrated. A text message. From Ethan. Only 3 words. "I believe you." Irvin stared at the screen. The message should have felt reassuring. Instead, it felt revealing, because Ethan had known him for almost 20 years, and even Ethan had needed convincing. That realization stayed with him long after midnight. The evidence file on the desk continued growing. The truth was becoming stronger every day. Yet the public story kept moving faster, for now. But stories built on assumptions eventually collided with facts, and when they did, the impact could be severe. Irvin looked once more at the growing timeline pinned beside the motel desk. The photograph, the hallway, the missing timestamp, the legal filing, the valet records, the archive requests, the contradictions. Somewhere inside all of it sat the answer, and for the first time he had the feeling that someone else might finally be ready to talk. Someone who had been there that night. Someone much closer to the center of the setup than any of them realized. The call came on a Tuesday morning, not from a lawyer, not from Ethan, not from Lauren, from a number Irvin didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Almost. Something made him answer. "Hello?" Several seconds passed. A woman's voice finally appeared, soft, nervous. "Is this Irvin Patterson?" "Yes." Another pause. Then, "My name is Olivia Grant." Irvin immediately sat upright. The bartender, the woman in the photograph, the person whose face had become attached to the accusation. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Olivia exhaled heavily. "I think we need to talk." 3 hours later, Irvin sat inside Rebecca Collins' office. He had called her immediately after the conversation. Rebecca agreed with his instincts. Any meeting needed to happen properly, documented, protected. Not because Olivia was a suspect, because everyone involved suddenly mattered. At 2:17 p.m., Olivia arrived. She looked different from the woman in the photograph. The image shown at the gala had captured confidence. This woman looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, tension in her shoulders. A person carrying something she no longer wanted to carry. Rebecca greeted her professionally, offered coffee, explained attorney-client protections, explained that nobody was forcing her to speak. Olivia nodded, then sat quietly for nearly a minute, as if deciding whether to continue. Irvin watched carefully, not judging, observing. Eventually she spoke. I didn't know what was happening. Rebecca remained silent, allowing the story to come naturally. Olivia looked down at her hands. The night of the gala. Another pause. I thought I was helping someone. Irvin felt his attention sharpen. Every word mattered now. Olivia continued. Vanessa approached me before the event. There it was, the first direct connection. Rebecca made a note. Olivia noticed, then kept going. She told me her husband might be overwhelmed by the crowd. Her eyes moved briefly toward Irvin, then away. She asked if I could point him toward a quieter hallway if he needed anything. Irvin didn't interrupt. Rebecca didn't interrupt. The room remained completely still. At the time, it sounded normal. Olivia swallowed. I work events. People ask strange favors all the time. She looked embarrassed, as though blaming herself. But Irvin already understood something important. Normal requests rarely appear suspicious in the moment. Only later. Only after consequences appear. Olivia continued speaking. When you approached the bar that night, she looked at Irvin. I recognized you from the photograph Vanessa had shown me. A photograph? That detail was new. Rebecca's pen stopped moving briefly. What photograph? She asked. Olivia frowned. A family picture. Rebecca exchanged a quick glance with Irvin. Interesting. Very interesting. Vanessa had prepared Olivia in advance, not extensively, but enough. Enough to ensure identification. Enough to ensure cooperation. Olivia continued. You asked where the restroom was. Irvin nodded. That's correct. I pointed you toward the west hallway. Another pause, then she added, exactly where Vanessa told me to send you. The room became very quiet, not because anyone was surprised, because confirmation felt different than suspicion. For days they had theorized. Now someone who had actually been there was speaking. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Did Vanessa explain why? No. Did she say anything else? Olivia hesitated. The hesitation lasted long enough to matter. Then she nodded. She told me not to worry if someone took pictures. Irvin felt something cold move through his chest. Not anger. Recognition. The setup was becoming visible, piece by piece, layer by layer. The photograph had never been spontaneous, never accidental. It had been expected, planned. Rebecca wrote several notes before asking another question. What happened after Mr. Patterson entered the hallway? Olivia answered immediately. I walked away. The certainty in her voice stood out. No hesitation, no uncertainty. I went back behind the bar. Did you ever meet privately with him? No. Touch him? No. Exchange numbers? No. Communicate afterward? No. Every answer landed like another brick in a growing structure, solid, consistent, simple. Truth often sounded that way. It didn't require complicated explanations. Then Olivia's expression changed, only slightly, but enough for Irvin to notice. There was more, a lot more. Rebecca noticed too. What else? Olivia looked toward the office window, gathering courage. Then she spoke. There was another person. Irvin immediately thought of Ryan Whitaker, Vanessa's brother, and a second later Olivia confirmed it. Ryan. Rebecca's pen stopped again. What about Ryan? Olivia folded her hands tightly. As soon as Mr. Patterson walked down the hallway, Ryan appeared. Irvin remained motionless. His pulse had slowed again, a familiar sign. His mind was processing, building, connecting. Olivia continued. I didn't think anything of it at first. Why not? Rebecca asked. Because he looked like he was waiting for someone. Waiting. Another important word. Not wandering, not passing through. Waiting. Olivia shook her head slowly. I remember it now because it felt strange afterward. The office remained silent, allowing her memory to unfold naturally. He kept looking toward the corridor. She swallowed. Then he checked his phone. Another pause. Then someone else arrived. Rebecca looked up. Who? I don't know her name. Can you describe her? Olivia nodded. Mid-40s, blonde, blue dress, phone in her hand. Irvin immediately recognized the description. Karen Monroe, one of Vanessa's closest friends, a regular at charity functions, a constant presence in the social circle, the same person who had been standing unusually close to Vanessa when the photographs appeared. Another piece clicked into place. Olivia wasn't finished. She reached into her purse, carefully, then removed her phone. The movement immediately caught Rebecca's attention. "What is that?" she asked. Olivia looked embarrassed. "A mistake." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Olivia unlocked the device, opened a file, then placed the phone on the desk. "It happened by accident." Nobody spoke. She explained. Several days before the gala, Vanessa had called her regarding event logistics. Olivia had been driving at the time. Her phone accidentally activated a recording application during the conversation. She didn't realize it until later. The recording remained stored in her device. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "Have you listened to it?" Olivia nodded. "More than once." "And?" The bartender looked toward Irvin, then toward Rebecca. Finally, she answered, "I think you should hear it yourselves." The room suddenly felt smaller. Rebecca carefully connected headphones, verified the file, checked timestamps. Everything about her movements became methodical, professional. Evidence first, assumptions later. After a few moments, she pressed play. Static filled the office, road noise, muffled voices. Then Vanessa's voice emerged, clear enough to understand. Not every word, but enough, far more than enough. Several minutes passed. Nobody interrupted. Nobody reacted outwardly. When the recording ended, silence returned. Heavy silence, different from the silence that had filled the ballroom. This silence carried weight, meaning, consequence. Rebecca slowly removed the headphones, then replayed one specific section, a short section, only a few seconds long, but devastating. Vanessa's voice, calm, matter-of-fact, saying words that completely changed the investigation. Not a confession, not directly, nothing that obvious, something more dangerous, a statement revealing prior knowledge, prior planning, prior coordination. Enough to suggest the photograph had never been chance, enough to suggest multiple people already knew where Irvin would be before he ever walked into that hallway. Rebecca closed the audio file, then looked at Olivia. "You understand how important this is?" Olivia nodded. Tears had begun forming in her eyes. Not dramatic tears, exhausted ones, the kind that appeared when somebody finally stopped carrying a secret. "I know." For the first time since arriving, Irvin spoke. His voice remained calm, steady. "Why come forward now?" Olivia looked at him. The answer arrived immediately, because she had been asking herself the same question for days. "I watched what happened to you." The office remained silent. "I watched people destroy you." She looked down. "And I knew something wasn't right." No speeches, no grand declarations, just honesty. Sometimes honesty sounded surprisingly simple. Rebecca carefully saved a copy of the recording, created backups, documented chain of custody. Every step mattered. Every procedure mattered. Because for the first time, they weren't just collecting evidence anymore. They were collecting witnesses, and witnesses had a way of changing everything, especially when they carried proof. As Olivia prepared to leave, Rebecca's phone buzzed. An email notification. The attorney glanced at the screen, then immediately sat up straighter. That reaction alone told Irvin something significant had happened. Rebecca opened the message, read it once, then again. Finally, she looked directly at Irvin. "The hotel archive team just finished reviewing another camera." Irvin felt his stomach tighten. "What did they find?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned the laptop screen toward him. A still image appeared, a hallway, a timestamp, and a face neither of them expected to see, standing exactly where Olivia claimed. Ryan Whitaker. Rebecca Collins did not speak for several seconds. Neither did Irvin. The still image remained frozen on the laptop screen. Timestamp visible, hallway visible, Ryan Whitaker visible. The significance wasn't merely that he was there, it was when he was there. The timestamp showed 8:46 p.m., exactly where Olivia said he would be, exactly when Olivia said he appeared. Independent confirmation, the kind investigators loved, because independent confirmation didn't care about opinions, it didn't care about loyalty, it didn't care about who was telling the truth, it simply existed. Rebecca enlarged the image. Ryan stood near a service corridor entrance, his body angled toward the hallway, one hand holding a phone, the other inside his pocket, waiting, watching, not walking through, not passing by, waiting. Irvin studied the frame, then Rebecca opened another image, and another, and another. The hotel archive team had extracted a sequence, not video yet, still frames, several seconds apart, enough to establish movement, enough to establish position, enough to establish presence. Ryan remained there for over 2 minutes, long enough to destroy any claim of coincidence, long enough to raise new questions. Rebecca finally closed the laptop, then looked at Irvin. "We need a timeline." Irvin nodded. The same thought had already formed. A complete reconstruction, minute by minute, system by system. No assumptions, no speculation, just records. The following morning became an exercise in precision. By 9 o'clock, Rebecca Lauren Bishop and Irvin occupied a conference room inside Rebecca's office. The large table disappeared beneath documents, printouts, diagrams, timestamps, security logs, valet records, hotel floor plans. Every piece of information now belonged to a growing puzzle. Lauren connected a laptop to a wall monitor. The first timestamp appeared. 8:41 p.m. Rebecca circled it. "Let's start here." Irvin immediately recognized the entry. His phone records. A text message received during the gala. The message had claimed Vanessa felt ill and needed help near the West Corridor. At the time, nothing about it seemed unusual. Now it looked very different. Rebecca highlighted the sender information. The message came from an online number. Not Vanessa's phone, not any recognizable contact. A spoofed number, another planned element, another piece. 8:41 p.m., Rebecca repeated. "Mr. Patterson leaves the ballroom." Lauren advanced the timeline. Next timestamp, 8:44 p.m. A hallway camera frame appeared. Olivia Grant, Irvin, the bartender speaking briefly, pointing down the corridor, then leaving, exactly as she described. No touching, no flirting, no secrecy. 30 seconds, maybe less. Rebecca wrote a note, verified by witness and footage. Next entry. 8:46 p.m. Ryan Whitaker appears. Independent camera, separate angle, separate system, same result. Waiting, watching. Rebecca didn't say anything. She simply added another note. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Lauren advanced again. 8:47 p.m. A new image appeared. This one came from another hallway camera. Lower quality, different angle, but clear enough. Karen Monroe, Vanessa's longtime friend. Phone raised, standing exactly where the photograph could have been taken. Nobody in the room spoke. They didn't need to. The implication was obvious. The photographer had been identified. Not conclusively, but strongly. Very strongly. Rebecca wrote another note, then another. The timeline continued. 8:49 p.m. Elevator records. Irvin enters elevator. Alone. No Olivia. No secret meeting. No affair. Just one man entering an elevator. Security logs confirmed it. Camera footage confirmed it. The systems agreed. And when systems agreed, reality became difficult to challenge. Lauren advanced to the next sequence. 8:50 p.m. The elevator reached a lower floor. Irvin exited. Still alone. Another camera. Another confirmation. Another piece. Rebecca leaned back. "This destroys the photograph." Irvin looked at the screen. Not quite. Not yet. The photograph still existed. People would still point at it. People would still believe it. But the story attached to it was beginning to collapse. And stories mattered more than images, especially in court. The reconstruction continued through the afternoon. Hour after hour, record after record. No shortcuts, no guesses, just evidence. By 4 o'clock, a remarkably clear picture had emerged. A picture no one expected. A picture that shifted attention away from Irvin entirely. It began with a parking garage access log. Lauren displayed it on the screen. Level B2, restricted entry point, timestamp 8:52 p.m. Rebecca immediately noticed something. The access credential belonged to Vanessa. Not unusual by itself. The gala was being held in the hotel. Guests moved around constantly. But context mattered. Timing mattered, especially when accusations depended on timing. The garage footage loaded slowly. Several seconds passed. Then the image appeared. Concrete walls, dim lighting, rows of parked vehicles. And then Vanessa, walking into frame, alone. The room became silent. Irvin felt his pulse slow again. The familiar sensation, the feeling that accompanies important information. Vanessa moved confidently, purposefully, not wandering, not lost. She knew exactly where she was going. Rebecca enlarged the frame. The timestamp remained visible. 8:52 p.m., 4 minutes after Irvin entered the elevator, 4 minutes after the supposed cheating encounter. The footage continued. Vanessa crossed the garage, approached a black SUV, stopped, waited. Then someone emerged from the driver's side. A man, tall, well-dressed, familiar, very familiar. The image quality wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Irvin recognized him immediately. So did Rebecca. So did Lauren. Charles Bennett, chairman of Vanessa's nonprofit board, one of the most respected men in her professional circle, married, wealthy, connected, powerful. The room remained completely silent. Charles approached Vanessa. They exchanged a few words, no audio, only movement. Then something happened, something nobody expected to see so soon. Charles placed a hand on Vanessa's shoulder, not casually, not professionally, personally, intimately. The footage continued, several more seconds, then the two disappeared behind the SUV. Lauren paused the video. Nobody spoke. For several moments, only the faint hum of the conference room projector filled the air. Finally, Rebecca broke the silence. Well? That single word carried considerable meaning. Irvin remained motionless, not because he felt nothing, because he felt too much. Shock, relief, disappointment, validation, all arriving simultaneously. Not because he enjoyed what he was seeing. He didn't. Not remotely. But because the evidence was finally moving in one direction, toward the truth. Rebecca leaned forward. Let's keep going. The footage resumed. Several minutes later, another camera picked up movement, the black SUV pulling away. Garage exit timestamp recorded. Vehicle identification recorded. Valet systems matched the entry. Everything aligned. Every system, every record, every timestamp. The consistency was remarkable, and consistency created credibility. By 6 o'clock, Rebecca's evidence board covered nearly an entire wall. The sequence now looked undeniable. 8:41 p.m., fake text. 8:44 p.m., Olivia directs Irvin. 8:46 p.m., Ryan waiting. 8:47 p.m., Karen positioned with phone. 8:49 p.m., Irvin alone in elevator. 8:52 p.m., Vanessa enters garage. 8:53 p.m., Charles arrives. Every minute documented, every step supported. The accusation that had destroyed Irvin's reputation suddenly looked very different. Not random, not emotional, strategic, constructed. Rebecca studied the board quietly, then spoke. This wasn't cover for embarrassment. Irvin looked toward her. What was it? Rebecca's eyes remained on the timeline. It looks like cover for something else. Nobody argued, because the evidence suggested exactly that. The accusation against Irvin had generated attention, public attention, social attention, legal attention, attention focused entirely in one direction, away from Vanessa, away from Charles, away from whatever existed between them. Lauren slowly closed her laptop. The room had grown darker outside. Evening shadows stretched across the conference room windows. The investigation had crossed an invisible line. Earlier, they were trying to prove Irvin's innocence. Now they were uncovering someone else's secrets. A much more dangerous process. Rebecca gathered several documents into a folder, then looked directly at Irvin. "We need to move carefully." He nodded. She was right. Very right. Because evidence this strong didn't just clear people. It threatened people. And threatened people often reacted unpredictably. As the meeting ended, Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming email. She opened it, read the first line, then froze, only briefly, but long enough. Irvin noticed immediately. "What is it?" Rebecca looked up. Her expression had changed. Not fear, not surprise, something closer to realization. "The hotel just finished processing the full garage footage." Irvin waited. Rebecca slowly turned the screen toward him. "You're going to want to see who gets into Charles Bennett's vehicle." The room remained silent as the footage loaded. Rebecca Collins sat at the head of the conference table. Lauren Bishop stood near the monitor. Irvin Patterson watched the screen. Nobody rushed. Evidence deserved patience, especially evidence that could change everything. The garage video began playing. Timestamp visible. Camera angle fixed. Concrete pillars divided the frame into sections. The black Cadillac Escalade sat near the far wall. Charles Bennett stood beside it. Vanessa approached from the east side of the garage. Every movement looked deliberate, comfortable, familiar. Not the behavior of two people meeting unexpectedly. The footage continued. Neither spoke in the recording. There was no audio. None was needed. Body language carried its own language. Charles opened the passenger side door. Vanessa smiled. Then she entered the vehicle. No hesitation, no confusion, no uncertainty. She got in as if she had done it before. The timestamp remained visible. 5:55 p.m. Rebecca paused the footage. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Lauren broke the silence. "That destroys the narrative." Rebecca nodded. "It does more than that." She pointed toward the screen. "It creates a new one." Irvin understood exactly what she meant. Until now, the accusation had been the story, the photograph, the alleged affair, the public humiliation. Those events had occupied everyone's attention. Now another possibility existed. What if the accusation wasn't a reaction? What if it was a distraction? Rebecca rewound the footage, then replayed it, again and again, searching for details. Small details mattered. The angle of a hand, the direction of a glance, the timing of a movement. Sometimes entire cases turned on details most people ignored. On the fourth viewing, Rebecca paused. "Look here." The image froze. Charles Bennett's wrist, specifically his watch. The attorney enlarged the frame, then compared it with another image taken from a separate garage camera. The timestamps aligned perfectly. Independent confirmation. Different camera, same result. The evidence was becoming unusually strong. Strong enough that Rebecca's tone changed. "We need to think ahead." Irvin looked toward her. "How far ahead?" "Court." The answer arrived immediately. Not emotionally, practically. Everything now pointed toward litigation, discovery, evidence review, formal proceedings. And once that happened, people would have to answer questions, real questions, questions supported by records. Rebecca closed the footage and organized several files. Then she looked directly at Irvin. "There's something you need to understand." "What?" "Being right doesn't automatically mean winning." He nodded. He already knew that. Truth and victory weren't identical. Sometimes they traveled together. Sometimes they didn't. Rebecca continued. "The evidence is moving in our direction. But people become unpredictable when evidence threatens them." That concern wasn't theoretical. The past 2 weeks had already demonstrated it. Anonymous complaints, social campaigns, legal accusations, manipulated photographs. Someone had invested significant effort into controlling the narrative. People rarely surrendered control willingly. The meeting ended shortly after 7 o'clock. Outside, Minneapolis had begun settling into evening. Office lights illuminated downtown towers. Traffic crawled through intersections. Ordinary life continued. Irvin drove toward the motel. The city passed quietly outside his windshield. For the first time since the gala anger surfaced, not explosive anger, something colder, more controlled. He thought about the photographs, the public accusations, the friends who disappeared, the job complaint, the lockout, everything. All of it had been built on a lie, and not a spontaneous lie, a planned one. That realization sat heavily in his chest. His phone vibrated. Rebecca, again. He answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Her voice sounded focused. "I just received confirmation." "About what?" "The valet company." Irvin pulled into a gas station parking lot and listened. Rebecca continued. "The Escalade. Charles Bennett's vehicle. The records match." Another piece, another confirmation. The valet company maintained electronic records for all vehicle movement. Arrival times, departure times, driver information, ticket numbers. The Escalade entered exactly when garage footage suggested, and left exactly when garage footage suggested. No contradictions, no gaps, no ambiguity. The systems agreed. Rebecca sounded satisfied. Attorneys appreciated agreement between independent records, especially when preparing for court. "Good," Irvin said. "It's better than good." Rebecca paused. "Now we know the footage isn't standing alone." That mattered. A single piece of evidence could be challenged. Multiple independent records supporting the same conclusion became far more difficult to attack. After ending the call, Irvin remained in the parking lot for several minutes, thinking. The pieces were connecting, slowly but clearly, and every connection pointed toward the same conclusion. The accusation had not been about exposing a cheating husband. It had been about protecting someone else. The following afternoon, Rebecca requested another meeting. This one took place inside her office conference room. Only 2 people attended. Rebecca, Irvin. The attorney placed several documents across the table. Legal motions, draft filings, evidence summaries. The stack looked substantial, because it was. Weeks of investigation had produced results. Rebecca pointed toward the first document. "Motion to preserve and admit digital evidence." Irvin scanned the pages. Technical descriptions, video references, chain of custody documentation. Everything looked professional, methodical, difficult to dismiss. "We're filing this." Rebecca nodded. "Immediately." She turned to another document. "Once filed, the court receives notice." Irvin understood the implication. The timeline was changing. Up until now, evidence existed mostly inside private investigations. Soon it would enter the legal system, and once it entered the legal system, people would lose the ability to ignore it. Rebecca folded her hands. "How badly do you want to confront Vanessa?" The question surprised him. He considered it carefully, then answered honestly. "Less than I did a week ago." Rebecca smiled slightly. That was probably the correct answer, because confrontation rarely produced useful results. Evidence did. Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Good." She leaned back. "Don't." Irvin raised an eyebrow. "Don't what?" "Don't call her. Don't message her. Don't try to force a confession." She pointed toward the evidence folders. "This is enough." He looked at the stack, then at the attorney, then back at the stack. Rebecca was right. The temptation existed. Of course it existed. Anyone would want answers. Anyone would want explanations. Anyone would want to ask why. But why rarely changed outcomes. Facts did. Around 6 o'clock, another development arrived. Lauren called. Her tone carried unusual urgency. "There's something else." Irvin immediately paid attention. "What happened?" "The board." "What board?" "Vanessa's nonprofit." Now things became interesting. Lauren continued. "One of their directors contacted the hotel." Irvin sat forward. "And?" "They requested information regarding Charles Bennett." That caught him completely off guard. Rebecca, who was sitting across from him, noticed the shift immediately. "What is it?" Irvin placed the call on speaker. Lauren repeated herself. The nonprofit board had begun asking questions, not publicly, not formally, but privately, quietly, internally. Someone inside the organization had become suspicious. Perhaps rumors, perhaps inconsistencies, perhaps something else. Whatever the cause, interest was growing. After the call ended, Rebecca looked thoughtful, very thoughtful. "This could move faster than I expected," Irvin agreed. Until now, the investigation had focused on clearing his name. Now the consequences were spreading outward, toward Vanessa, toward Charles, toward everyone connected to the deception. Rebecca opened her laptop, reviewed several notes, then looked directly at Irvin. "We file tomorrow." He nodded. The decision felt correct, necessary, overdue. Weeks earlier, the accusation had arrived like a wave, sudden, overwhelming, uncontested. Tomorrow the evidence would begin moving in the opposite direction. Not through gossip, not through social media, not through public arguments, through the legal system. The place where timestamps mattered, where records mattered, where evidence mattered. As the meeting ended, Rebecca received another email. She opened it casually, then stopped reading. A few seconds passed. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Irvin noticed. "What is it?" Rebecca slowly turned the screen toward him. The email contained a notice, official, formal, unexpected. A hearing date. The court had moved faster than anticipated, much faster, and for the first time the evidence wouldn't remain inside conference rooms and attorney offices. It would be displayed publicly, in a courtroom, for everyone to see. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, Hennepin County Family Court, Courtroom 4B, 900 a.m. 3 weeks earlier, Irvin Patterson had been sitting in a hotel ballroom while friends silently judged him. Now he sat in a courthouse parking garage, adjusting the cuffs of the same charcoal jacket he had worn that night. Not because he lacked other clothes, because he remembered. The jacket reminded him where this had started. The accusation, the photograph, the whispers, the locked front door, everything. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Downtown Minneapolis looked gray beneath low clouds. Irvin checked his watch. 8:21 a.m. Enough time. No rush. No panic. Just procedure. That was what Rebecca Collins had drilled into him during the previous week. Procedure. The legal system moved differently than social circles. Opinions mattered less. Evidence mattered more. Inside the courthouse, security lines moved steadily. Attorneys carried briefcases. Families sat quietly in hallways. People waited for decisions that would alter their lives. Irvin understood he was one of them now. At 8:43, he met Rebecca outside courtroom 4B. She carried 2 large binders. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just evidence, organized, indexed, prepared. "You sleep?" she asked. "A little." Rebecca nodded. "Good enough." That was as close to encouragement as she usually offered. Several minutes later, Vanessa arrived. She wasn't alone. 3 friends accompanied her: Michael Reeves, Karen Monroe, and another woman from the charity board. The same people who had stood closest to her after the accusation. The same people who had repeated the story. The same people who never once contacted Irvin directly. Vanessa wore a navy designer suit, perfectly tailored, perfectly composed. From a distance, she looked confident, professional, untouchable. Her attorney walked beside her carrying a leather case. The man appeared polished. Expensive watch, expensive shoes, expensive confidence. The kind that came from believing a case was already won. Irvin watched quietly. Not because he felt nothing, because observation had become a habit. He noticed Karen whispering something, Michael nodding, Vanessa avoiding eye contact. Interesting. People often avoided eye contact when reality became uncertain. At exactly 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone entered. The room itself felt smaller than Irvin expected. Dark wood, simple layout, no dramatic television-style atmosphere, just a judge's bench, several tables, A few rows of seats. Real life rarely looked like movies. The hearing began promptly. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. The room stood, then sat. Formalities followed. Names were recorded, appearances noted, procedural matters addressed. Everything moved with deliberate efficiency. Then Vanessa's attorney stood, and the story began. For nearly 20 minutes he presented the narrative that had dominated the past month. Marital betrayal, loss of trust, emotional damage, public embarrassment. The language sounded polished, professional, convincing, especially to someone unfamiliar with the facts. The attorney displayed the photograph. The same photograph. The image appeared on a courtroom monitor. Larger than life. Irvin stared at it. Strange. A month ago that image had nearly destroyed him. Now it looked small, almost fragile, because he understood what existed outside the frame. Vanessa's attorney pointed toward the image. Mrs. Patterson became aware of inappropriate conduct involving another woman. The judge listened. Expression neutral, professional, no visible reaction. The attorney continued. Witness statements, character concerns, relationship deterioration. Everything sounded dramatic. Everything sounded compelling. But one thing remained missing. Proof. Real proof. Not assumptions, not interpretations. Proof. Eventually, the attorney sat down. The courtroom grew quiet. Judge Whitmore turned toward Rebecca. Ms. Collins. Rebecca stood. No theatrics, no dramatic pause, no emotional speech, just a lawyer carrying evidence. Your Honor, before discussing allegations, I would like to discuss records. The difference was immediate. Allegations, records, two very different worlds. Rebecca approached the monitor, connected a drive, opened a presentation. The first slide appeared. A timeline. Simple, clean, professional. The judge leaned forward slightly. So did several observers. Even Vanessa's attorney looked more attentive. Rebecca began calmly. No one disputes that this photograph exists. The image appeared again, large, familiar. The question is whether it accurately represents what has been claimed. She clicked. The next slide appeared, a zoomed-in version, highlighted sections, annotations, technical details. The courtroom remained silent. Rebecca pointed toward the cropped area. The original timestamp is missing. Vanessa's attorney immediately objected. Rebecca responded immediately. The judge allowed her to continue. The atmosphere shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but noticeably, because the conversation had moved away from feelings, toward facts. Rebecca displayed another image, then another, then another. Different camera angles, different timestamps, different systems. The accumulation mattered. One photograph told a story. Multiple records told reality. The judge studied each carefully, taking notes, asking questions, listening. Exactly what Rebecca wanted. Around 10:15 a.m., the attorney reached the section everyone had been waiting for. The hallway footage, not the full video, not yet. Still frames first, methodical, structured. The screen displayed the west hallway, timestamp visible, Olivia Grant visible, Irvin visible. Rebecca explained the sequence. 30-second interaction. Directions given. Nothing more. Next image. Olivia leaving. Next image. Irvin alone. Next image. Ryan Whitaker entering the frame. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Rebecca didn't need to explain why. The image spoke for itself. Ryan stood there, waiting, watching, exactly as Olivia described. The judge examined the image carefully, then looked toward Vanessa's attorney. No questions, just a look. Sometimes that was enough. Rebecca continued. Next image. Karen Monroe. Phone raised. Positioned precisely where the accusation photograph could have been captured. A faint movement passed through the courtroom. Not loud, not dramatic, just people recognizing implications. Michael Reeves shifted slightly in his seat. Karen looked downward. Vanessa remained expressionless, at least outwardly. Rebecca moved forward. No celebration, no triumph, only evidence. Then came the elevator records. The screen displayed access logs, timestamp, floor numbers, movement history. The data showed exactly what investigators already knew. Irvin entered alone, exited alone. No bartender, no affair, no secret meeting. Just records. Objective, unemotional, accurate. Judge Whitmore studied the screen, then reviewed several printed copies. The courtroom felt different now, not because anyone had declared victory, because uncertainty had entered the room, and uncertainty was dangerous for accusations, especially accusations built upon confidence. Rebecca returned to counsel table briefly, then stood again. "Your Honor." The judge looked up. "We would like permission to continue with the digital evidence review." Vanessa's attorney objected immediately, not aggressively, but quickly. Too quickly. The objection itself seemed revealing. The judge listened carefully, asked questions, reviewed notes, then delivered her ruling. "The court will allow preliminary review." The words landed heavily. Irvin felt it immediately. Not relief, momentum, a subtle but important difference. The evidence had crossed an invisible threshold, no longer private, no longer theoretical, now part of the official record. Rebecca thanked the court, then walked back toward the monitor. The next file waited on her laptop, prepared, organized, ready. The courtroom projector hummed softly. Everyone watched, everyone waited, because they sensed something important was coming. They just didn't know how important. Rebecca opened the next evidence folder. The file name appeared briefly on screen. Garage Surveillance Level B2. For the first time all morning, several people on Vanessa's side visibly stiffened. Small reactions, but real ones. Irvin noticed every single one. The judge adjusted her glasses. The monitor refreshed. The loading icon spun. Then the first frame of the parking garage footage appeared, and the room suddenly felt much smaller. The parking garage footage never played. Not immediately. Rebecca Collins surprised everyone, including Irvin. Instead of opening the garage video, she minimized the file and returned to the hallway evidence. The decision seemed strange at first. Then Irvin understood. She wasn't trying to create a dramatic moment. She was building a foundation. A courtroom wasn't a place for surprises. It was a place for structure. Evidence had to walk before it could run. Rebecca faced the judge. "Your Honor, before we discuss the garage footage, I'd like the court to see the complete hallway sequence." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Proceed." The monitor changed. A new video file appeared. West Hallway Camera Archive. Timestamp verified. Chain of custody documented. Hotel records attached. Everything properly authenticated. Rebecca pressed play. The video began. The hallway appeared on screen. Quiet, ordinary, empty. No dramatic music. No hidden narration. Just reality. The timestamp moved steadily in the corner. 8:43 p.m. 8:44 p.m. Several people leaned forward in their seats. Others remained perfectly still. The courtroom had become unusually quiet, the kind of silence that appears when people realize assumptions may be tested. The footage continued. Then Irvin entered the frame. There he was, walking calmly through the hallway, exactly as the photograph suggested. For one brief moment, Vanessa's attorney appeared relieved. The image matched the accusation, at least initially. Then Olivia Grant entered, the bartender, the woman at the center of the scandal. Rebecca said nothing. She allowed the footage to speak. Olivia pointed down the corridor. Irvin nodded. A brief exchange, less than half a minute. Then Olivia left. Immediately. No hesitation. No lingering. No flirtation. No secret conversation. Nothing. The courtroom watched. Rebecca remained silent. The footage continued. Several more seconds passed. Irvin remained alone, standing by himself. The hallway completely empty. Then Ryan Whitaker appeared. Exactly as Olivia described. Exactly as the still images suggested. The impact felt different in motion. Much different. Still photographs created possibilities. Video created sequences. And sequences created context. Ryan wasn't walking through the corridor. He wasn't passing by. He entered, stopped, looked around, checked his phone, waited. The behavior looked deliberate, because it was deliberate. Rebecca paused the footage. The image froze. Ryan standing in the hallway, timestamp visible. The judge studied the screen, then made a note. Vanessa's attorney remained quiet. For the first time that morning, he looked uncertain. Not defeated, just uncertain. Rebecca resumed the video. The sequence continued. Several seconds later, another figure appeared. Karen Monroe, blue dress, phone in hand. She moved into position, raised the phone, and pointed it directly toward the corridor. The courtroom remained silent. Nobody needed an explanation. The implication was obvious. This was where the accusation photograph originated. This was the moment. This was the setup. Rebecca paused again, then displayed the original photograph beside the video frame, side by side. The comparison was devastating. Same angle, same lighting, same hallway, same position. The courtroom could see it immediately. The accusation image hadn't captured reality. It had captured a carefully selected fraction of reality. A fragment, a moment isolated from its context. The difference mattered. A lot. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, studied both images carefully, then returned her attention to Rebecca. Continue. Rebecca nodded. The footage resumed. Several more seconds passed. Then Irvin entered the elevator. Alone. The doors closed. The hallway emptied. The video continued for nearly another minute. Nothing happened. No affair, no secret meeting, no hidden encounter. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. The video ended. Silence followed. Not dramatic silence, not emotional silence. The silence of people adjusting their understanding. The kind that appears when certainty begins to collapse. Rebecca allowed it to linger, then spoke. Your Honor, the allegation presented to friends, family members, employers, and legal counsel relied heavily upon a single image. She gestured toward the monitor. The complete footage shows a very different sequence. No exaggeration, no performance, just facts. Vanessa's attorney stood, objected, argued that interpretations differed, argued that the footage didn't prove intent, argued that people could draw different conclusions. Rebecca agreed. That surprised him. She actually agreed. Correct, she said. The footage does not prove intent. Then she paused. But it absolutely disproves the story attached to the photograph. That distinction landed cleanly. Even the judge appeared to appreciate it. Rebecca wasn't claiming more than the evidence supported. She was claiming exactly what it supported. Nothing less, nothing more. That gave her credibility. The hearing paused briefly while documents were exchanged. During the break, Irvin looked toward the gallery. Several familiar faces sat there. Friends, former friends, acquaintances, people from the charity circle, people who had heard the accusations, people who had believed them. Michael Reeves sat rigidly in the second row. Karen Monroe stared downward. A man from Vanessa's nonprofit board looked visibly uncomfortable. The room felt different now. The social momentum had shifted, not completely, but noticeably. For weeks, everyone had operated from one assumption. Irvin cheated. Now that assumption had a problem. Evidence. And evidence was stubborn. The hearing resumed. Rebecca introduced additional records, elevator logs, keycard reports, system timestamps. Every source pointed toward the same conclusion. The consistency became impossible to ignore. One system could fail. Multiple systems agreeing became difficult to explain away. The judge spent considerable time reviewing the records. Questions followed. Precise questions. Good questions. Rebecca answered each carefully, methodically. Vanessa's attorney tried challenging chain of custody. Rebecca produced documentation. He questioned timing. Rebecca produced timestamps. He questioned reliability. Rebecca produced independent confirmations. Every challenge met preparation. Every objection met records. The process felt strangely familiar to Irvin, not because he understood courtroom strategy, because he understood investigations. And this looked exactly like one. A system, a sequence, a reconstruction. Near noon, the judge requested a short recess. Everyone stood. People stretched. Attorneys conferred quietly. The atmosphere felt tense, but no longer one-sided. Rebecca gathered several documents into a separate folder, a folder she had not yet opened. Irvin noticed immediately. Garage footage. Rebecca nodded. Garage footage. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Rebecca said something interesting. The hallway evidence cleared you. Irvin looked at her. And the garage footage. Rebecca closed the folder. That does something else. The recess ended 10 minutes later. Everyone returned to their seats. The judge resumed proceedings. The courtroom settled. Rebecca stood. The folder remained in her hands. The same folder. The garage footage folder. The atmosphere changed instantly, even before anyone spoke. Vanessa remained composed, at least outwardly. Charles Bennett wasn't present, but his name now existed inside multiple exhibits, multiple records, multiple timelines. Rebecca approached the monitor once more. The courtroom watched. The judge watched. Vanessa's attorney watched. Everyone understood they were about to see the next piece, the next sequence, the next truth. Rebecca connected another drive, opened another file, then turned toward the bench. Your Honor, the respondent requests permission to introduce evidence regarding events occurring at parking level B2. The judge nodded. Granted. Rebecca clicked the file. The loading icon appeared. Several seconds passed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The screen refreshed. The first frame appeared. Concrete walls, parking spaces, a black Cadillac Escalade, and standing beside it, Vanessa Patterson. Nobody looked at Irvin anymore. Not at first. Every eye in the courtroom fixed itself on the monitor. Vanessa Patterson stood frozen on the screen beside a black Cadillac Escalade. Timestamp visible, location visible, date visible. Nothing hidden, nothing cropped, nothing left to imagination. Rebecca Collins pressed play. The footage moved forward. Vanessa crossed the parking level with confidence. Not hurried, not confused, not searching. She knew exactly where she was going. The distinction mattered. The accusation against Irvin depended heavily on timing. It depended on Vanessa supposedly discovering something, witnessing something, reacting emotionally to something. The garage footage suggested something very different. It suggested intention, planning, movement toward a destination. The courtroom watched. No one spoke. Several seconds later, Charles Bennett entered the frame, the chairman of the nonprofit board, one of the most respected men in Vanessa's professional circle, a married man, a public figure, a man whose reputation carried substantial value. The monitor showed him approaching the SUV, then approaching Vanessa, then stopping directly in front of her. The footage contained no audio. None was necessary. The body language told its own story. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly, not dramatically, just enough for Irvin to notice. Rebecca allowed the video to continue. Charles opened the passenger side door. Vanessa entered, comfortably, naturally, without hesitation, without surprise, as though this interaction belonged to an existing pattern, not a new one. The video ended several moments later. The courtroom remained completely silent. Irvin had never experienced silence quite like it. Weeks earlier, silence had condemned him. Now silence carried something else, recognition. People were seeing the same thing simultaneously, and they were reaching conclusions simultaneously, not because Rebecca told them what to think, because the footage existed, because reality existed, because timestamps existed. Facts have a peculiar effect. They remove options. Rebecca spoke calmly. Your Honor, we'd now like to introduce supporting records. The judge nodded. Proceed. The next exhibit appeared. Valet documentation, electronic logs, vehicle identification records, entry timestamps, exit timestamps. The information wasn't exciting. It wasn't emotional. Most juries would probably find it boring. But lawyers loved boring evidence, because boring evidence tended to be reliable. Rebecca highlighted several entries. The Escalade entered. The Escalade exited. The timestamps matched the surveillance footage precisely. Independent system. Same conclusion. Then came another layer. Keycard records, hotel access logs, Vanessa's credentials, movement data. Again, the timestamps aligned. Again, the systems agreed. Again, the narrative grew stronger. The courtroom atmosphere shifted noticeably, not dramatically, gradually, like a tide changing direction. People who had entered the room expecting confirmation of one story now faced a different one, a much different one. Irvin looked toward the gallery. Several familiar faces sat motionless. Michael Reeves no longer appeared confident. Karen Monroe stared at the floor. A woman from the charity board folded her arms tightly across her chest. No one whispered. No one exchanged comments. The evidence had made conversation difficult. Judge Whitmore reviewed the documents carefully, then looked toward Vanessa's attorney. The attorney stood. He attempted a response. To his credit, he tried. He argued that Vanessa's presence in the garage did not automatically prove misconduct. True. Rebecca agreed immediately. The judge appreciated that. Again, no exaggeration, no overreach. Rebecca wasn't arguing infidelity. Not directly. She was arguing credibility. And credibility sat at the center of the case. Vanessa had presented herself as a victim who discovered betrayal. The records now showed she was elsewhere during critical moments. That mattered. A lot. The judge asked several questions, detailed questions, specific questions. Rebecca answered with timestamps, records, documents. Every answer led back to evidence, not assumptions, evidence. The hearing continued into the afternoon. Piece by piece, layer by layer, the structure of the accusation continued weakening. Then Rebecca introduced one final exhibit, the valet departure record, a seemingly insignificant document. 1 page, 1 timestamp, 1 vehicle, 1 departure. But sometimes 1 page changes everything. The document showed Charles Bennett's Escalade leaving the hotel, the driver identified, the passenger count recorded, the departure time verified. The records aligned perfectly with the surveillance footage. Another independent confirmation, another locked door, another closed escape route. The attorney representing Vanessa objected again, less forcefully this time. The confidence from earlier had faded, not disappeared, just diminished. Judge Whitmore listened, then overruled the objection. The exhibit remained. The courtroom remained silent. And for the first time since the hearing began, Rebecca stopped presenting evidence. She simply stood, waited, allowed the accumulated weight to settle over the room. That strategy proved remarkably effective, because once people saw the complete timeline, they no longer needed persuasion. They needed time, time to absorb, time to adjust, time to recognize what had happened. Weeks of assumptions were collapsing. Publicly, methodically. Irvin noticed Ethan Caldwell sitting near the back row. He hadn't known Ethan planned to attend. Their eyes met briefly, only briefly, but it was enough. Ethan looked away first, not from discomfort, from regret. The expression was unmistakable, and strangely Irvin felt no satisfaction. None. He wasn't interested in humiliating people. Not anymore. He simply wanted the truth placed where everyone could see it. The truth was finally doing its own work. Judge Whitmore eventually set down her pen. The room immediately became still. Everyone understood the significance. Judges rarely stopped writing unless they had reached a point worth addressing. The judge folded her hands, then spoke. Her voice remained calm, professional, measured. The court has significant concerns regarding the reliability of several allegations presented thus far. The statement landed heavily, not because it was dramatic, because it came from the bench, officially, publicly, on the record. The judge continued. The evidence reviewed today raises serious questions regarding timeline accuracy and witness credibility. More notes, more silence, more shifting expressions throughout the courtroom. Michael Reeves lowered his eyes. Karen Monroe sat perfectly still. Several observers exchanged cautious glances. The social momentum had fully reversed. Irvin could feel it. Weeks earlier, people avoided looking at him. Now they avoided looking at one another. Because every person in the room knew what came next. Questions. Lots of questions. Questions nobody wanted to answer. The judge continued speaking. She emphasized that additional review would occur, that further proceedings remained necessary, that no final conclusions had yet been reached. All true, all important, but the warning that followed mattered most. Judge Whitmore looked directly toward Vanessa's table, then delivered a statement nobody in the room expected. The court also reminds all parties that knowingly spreading false allegations may create separate legal consequences. The sentence hung in the air. Separate legal consequences. Nobody misunderstood what it meant. Nobody needed clarification. The message had been delivered, clearly, professionally, precisely. The hearing concluded shortly afterward. People began standing, gathering documents, collecting bags, quietly preparing to leave. The energy inside the courtroom felt completely different than it had that morning. Not louder, quieter, much quieter. Irvin remained seated for several moments, watching, observing, the same habit that had served him throughout the entire ordeal. Vanessa remained at counsel table. Her attorney spoke softly beside her. Karen Monroe avoided eye contact with almost everyone. Michael Reeves left quickly, almost too quickly, and Ethan remained near the back, waiting, as though considering whether to approach. Eventually, Rebecca placed a hand on Irvin's shoulder. "We should go." He nodded. Together they exited the courtroom. The hallway outside felt brighter, larger, less confined. People moved around them carrying files and briefcases, ordinary courthouse activity. Yet everything felt different. Not because the battle was over. It wasn't. Not even close. Because for the first time since the photographs appeared, the truth had entered the room. Officially, publicly, permanently. As they reached the courthouse exit, Rebecca's phone vibrated. She checked the screen, then stopped walking. That reaction immediately caught Irvin's attention. "What happened?" Rebecca looked up. The expression on her face suggested another development, another consequence, another domino falling somewhere beyond the courtroom. "The nonprofit board just scheduled an emergency meeting." Irvin waited. Rebecca glanced back toward the courthouse, then at the notification again. "They've placed Charles Bennett under internal review." Consequences did not arrive all at once. They arrived quietly. One phone call, one resignation, one unanswered email, one uncomfortable meeting. The dramatic part had happened inside the courtroom. What followed was slower, more practical, and in many ways more damaging. 3 days after the hearing, Charles Bennett resigned as chairman of the nonprofit board. The announcement appeared in a brief statement distributed to board members. No public explanation, no detailed justification, just a resignation. Professional, clean, controlled, at least on the surface. Irvin learned about it from Rebecca. The attorney forwarded the statement with a single message: "First domino." Irvin read the announcement twice, then closed the email. No celebration, no satisfaction, only confirmation. The evidence had begun moving beyond the courtroom, exactly as Rebecca predicted. The following week, additional developments appeared. The nonprofit launched an internal review. Again, not public, not yet, internal. Board members wanted answers. Donors wanted answers. People responsible for large amounts of money generally disliked uncertainty. And uncertainty now surrounded several important people, Vanessa included. Irvin spent most of those days working, not because life had returned to normal, because routine helped. Routine created structure. Structure prevented obsession. During the worst weeks of the accusation, he had barely thought about anything except evidence. Now he forced himself back into ordinary habits. Morning coffee, work reports, client inspections, equipment audits. Simple things, reliable things. The return to work felt especially significant. The anonymous complaint submitted to Twin Cities SecureTech had collapsed completely. Human Resources conducted its review. The complaint contained no evidence, no witnesses, no documentation, only rumors. Rumors didn't survive long under scrutiny, especially after courtroom records became available. Greg Lawson called him personally. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Everything's closed. Irvin sat quietly at his desk. Officially. Officially. A pause followed. Then Greg continued. Never should have happened. The apology sounded genuine. That mattered. Not because it erased anything, because genuine apologies were becoming rare. Irvin accepted it, then returned to work. Another domino, another consequence. A week later, Rebecca requested a meeting. Her office looked exactly as it always did. Organized, efficient, no wasted space, no wasted energy. She placed several folders on the conference table. Good news. Irvin sat down. What kind? The useful kind. Rebecca opened the first folder. Defamation documentation, witness statements, communication records, screenshots, timeline summaries, everything connected to the public accusations, everything connected to the reputational damage. The collection looked substantial, because it was. Weeks of allegations had created a large paper trail, and paper trails often become evidence. Rebecca explained the strategy carefully. Not revenge, not punishment, accountability, a distinction she emphasized repeatedly. The goal wasn't emotional satisfaction. The goal was documented resolution, professional resolution, legal resolution. Irvin appreciated that approach, perhaps because it mirrored his own. He never wanted a public spectacle. He never wanted people humiliated. He simply wanted facts acknowledged. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, Rebecca had assembled one of the strongest files Irvin had seen, not because it contained dramatic revelations, because it contained consistency. Consistency wins arguments. Consistency wins cases. The truth had become remarkably consistent. Outside Rebecca's office, autumn had arrived. The air felt colder. Trees along downtown Minneapolis streets had begun changing color. Life continued, as it always did, even during conflict, even after betrayal, even after lies. Around that same time, another development emerged. Ryan Whitaker, Vanessa's brother, the man from the hallway footage, the man standing near the service corridor, the man who advised Irvin to leave quietly. His role was becoming increasingly difficult to explain. Several records now placed him near key moments. Several witnesses remembered his presence. Several timelines included his movements. Nothing criminal, not directly, but enough to raise questions. Many questions. Questions Ryan seemed unwilling to answer. Rebecca received formal notice that Ryan intended to limit his participation in future proceedings. That decision surprised nobody. Not anymore. The evidence surrounding him had grown uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Another domino. Then came something unexpected. A package arrived at the motel. No return address, no note, just a box. Inside sat copies of Charity Committee communications, printed emails, meeting notes, internal messages. Someone had clearly decided to cooperate anonymously. Rebecca reviewed everything carefully. Most of it contained little value, but several documents revealed something important. The accusation against Irvin had circulated much earlier than people admitted. Days earlier, perhaps longer. The narrative had been prepared before it became public. Another pattern, another confirmation, another indication that nothing about the situation had been spontaneous. The file joined the growing evidence archive. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained largely silent, publicly at least. The social media posts stopped. The group chat discussions disappeared. The supportive messages from friends became noticeably less frequent. Momentum had shifted. People rarely enjoyed standing near collapsing stories, especially when evidence existed. The social circle that once rallied around Vanessa suddenly became quieter, more cautious, more selective. Irvin noticed, but he didn't comment. There was no point. Human behavior explained itself. Then, one Thursday evening, his phone began ringing. The first call arrived at 6:12 p.m. Vanessa. Irvin stared at the screen, then ignored it. A minute later, another call, then another, then another. The pattern continued. He placed the phone face down on the motel desk and returned to reviewing work reports. The calls continued anyway. By 8 o'clock, the count reached 11. By 9 o'clock 16. By 10 o'clock 23. 23 missed calls, all from Vanessa. The number felt oddly symbolic. Weeks earlier, she hadn't wanted conversation. Weeks earlier, communication happened through attorneys, through accusations, through legal filings. Now suddenly she wanted contact. The timing interested him, more than the calls themselves, because timing always mattered. He showed the call log to Rebecca the next morning. The attorney studied it briefly, then smiled slightly. What? Rebecca closed the file. Pressure. Irvin understood immediately. Pressure changes behavior. Evidence creates pressure. Consequences create pressure. People who feel secure rarely make 23 unanswered calls in one evening. The pattern suggested concern, perhaps fear, perhaps desperation, perhaps something else. Whatever the reason, Rebecca advised caution. Don't answer. I wasn't planning to. Good. She leaned back in her chair. If she wants communication, she has attorneys. The advice made sense. Everything now belonged inside formal channels. The situation had progressed beyond personal conversations, far beyond them. As the days passed, the calls stopped, but other developments continued. Board investigations expanded. Additional records surfaced. Witnesses became more cooperative. Questions became harder to avoid. And through it all, Irvin maintained the same approach. Work, evidence, patience, routine. No interviews, no social media statements, no public retaliation, nothing. The strategy frustrated some people. Ethan even mentioned it during one conversation. You know, everyone expects some kind of response. Irvin looked across the diner table. What kind? I don't know. A victory lap. A public statement. Something. Irvin stirred his coffee, then shook his head. The evidence already spoke. Ethan didn't argue, because he knew it was true. The evidence had spoken, and more importantly, people had listened. As autumn deepened across Minneapolis, one reality became impossible to ignore. The accusation that nearly destroyed Irvin Patterson had collapsed, not through shouting, not through revenge, not through public warfare, through records, through patience, through facts, exactly the way he always hoped it would. But one final step still remained, one final meeting, one final set of papers, one final conversation that could not be avoided forever. Because regardless of everything else, the marriage itself still needed an ending, and Rebecca Collins had just scheduled it. The final meeting took place on a Wednesday afternoon, not in a courtroom, not in a restaurant, not in the house where Irvin Patterson and Vanessa had spent 8 years building a marriage. It happened inside Rebecca Collins' conference room. Neutral ground, professional ground, the kind of place where emotions carried less weight than documents. Outside Minneapolis sat beneath a gray October sky. Rain tapped softly against the office windows. Traffic moved slowly below. Inside, everything felt still. Rebecca had prepared the room carefully. 3 chairs, several folders, a stack of legal documents. Nothing unnecessary, nothing distracting. Irvin arrived 20 minutes early, not because he felt nervous, because punctuality had always been his habit. He sat quietly at the conference table. A legal folder rested in front of him. Inside were copies of the timeline, the photographs, the surveillance records, the valet logs, the courtroom exhibits, months of evidence compressed into paper, the entire collapse of a lie contained within a few inches of documents. Rebecca entered carrying coffee. She placed a cup beside him. Neither spoke immediately. There wasn't much left to say. The evidence had already said most of it. At exactly 2 o'clock, Vanessa arrived with her attorney. For the first time in months, Irvin saw her from less than 10 feet away. The experience felt strangely distant, like looking at someone he once knew, not someone he knew now. Vanessa appeared tired, not dramatically, not visibly broken, simply tired, the kind of fatigue that accumulates when pressure lasts too long. Irvin noticed the details automatically, a habit he could never seem to stop, the slightly slower movements, the tension around her eyes, the careful way she avoided looking directly at him, Observations. Nothing more. Rebecca opened the meeting. Professional, efficient, straight to business. The attorneys reviewed the settlement framework, asset division, property distribution, financial responsibilities, everything discussed calmly, methodically. The conversation remained surprisingly civil, perhaps because there wasn't much left to argue about. The evidence had narrowed the available positions, reduced uncertainty, reduced leverage, reduced options. Facts often do that. For nearly 40 minutes, the discussion focused entirely on legal matters, numbers, deadlines, paperwork. Then something changed. A pause appeared in the conversation, a small one, but noticeable. Vanessa finally looked across the table, toward Irvin, the first direct eye contact of the afternoon. Several seconds passed. Then she spoke, not to Rebecca, not to her attorney, to him. "I never thought things would go this far." The room became very quiet. Rebecca remained silent, allowing the moment to exist. Irvin considered the statement, carefully, then answered. They didn't have to. No anger, no accusation, just a fact. Vanessa looked down briefly, then back up. I wasn't trying to destroy your life. The statement hung in the room. Irvin listened, but said nothing, because explanations interested him less than they once did. People often explain themselves after consequences arrive. The explanations rarely change what happened. Vanessa continued. It got bigger than I expected. Again, Irvin remained silent, not because he wanted to punish her, because he no longer needed answers. The investigation had already provided them. The timeline had already provided them. The evidence had already provided them. Rebecca gently redirected the meeting back toward legal matters. The discussion continued. More documents, more signatures, more final details. Then another pause appeared, this one longer, more significant. Vanessa's attorney stepped out briefly to take a call. Rebecca used the opportunity to organize paperwork. For several moments, only Irvin and Vanessa sat across from one another. No courtroom, no audience, no social circle, no photographs, just two people and the consequences of their choices. Vanessa looked toward the folder resting in front of him. The timeline. Irvin glanced down, then nodded. The timeline. A faint smile appeared on her face. Not happiness, recognition. You're really the only person I know who would build a timeline. The observation might have been a joke years earlier. Now it sounded different, more reflective. Irvin looked at the documents. The timeline mattered. Vanessa nodded slowly, because she knew it was true. The timeline mattered. The timestamps mattered. The records mattered. Everything she thought nobody would notice had eventually been noticed, not by luck, by patience. Several seconds passed. Then Vanessa asked the question Irvin suspected she had wanted to ask for months. When did you know? He considered it. The answer wasn't obvious. Not exactly. Then he remembered. The photograph. Vanessa looked confused. What about it? The timestamp was missing. The room became silent again. Vanessa stared at him, not speaking, not moving. For a brief moment, something almost resembling disbelief crossed her face, as if she had expected a more complicated answer, a dramatic breakthrough, a secret witness, some extraordinary discovery. Instead, it began with a missing timestamp. One small detail, one cropped corner, one mistake. Irvin continued. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Nothing more needed to be said. The truth often begins that way, not with giant revelations, with small inconsistencies, tiny cracks, details people assume nobody will notice. Rebecca returned to the table. The moment ended. The paperwork resumed. 45 minutes later, the final agreement sat complete. Property division finalized, financial matters resolved, legal language approved, everything ready. Only signatures remained. Rebecca placed the documents in front of both parties. The room felt unusually quiet. Even the rain outside seemed softer. Irvin picked up the pen first, not because he felt eager, because he felt ready. There was a difference. He signed carefully. One page, then another, then another. Years of marriage ending through a series of signatures. No speeches, no dramatic confrontation, just paperwork. Real life often works that way. Vanessa signed next. The process took only minutes, much less time than the conflict itself. When the final page was complete, Rebecca collected the documents, professional, organized, finished. The marriage was effectively over, not emotionally, legally, and legal endings tend to last. As Rebecca reviewed the signatures, Irvin reached into his pocket. The movement drew no attention at first. Then he placed something on the table, a simple gold wedding ring. The ring rested beside the signed agreement. Quiet, unremarkable, final. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The symbolism was obvious. Years earlier, that ring represented promises. Now it represented closure. Nothing more, nothing less. Rebecca placed the signed documents into a file box. The sound of the lid closing echoed softly through the room. A small sound, but meaningful. One chapter ending, another beginning. The meeting concluded moments later. People stood, collected belongings, prepared to leave. No one shook hands, no one argued, no one raised their voice. The conflict that had consumed months of their lives ended with silence. As Irvin reached the door, Rebecca's assistant entered, carrying several envelopes. Routine deliveries, nothing unusual. One envelope sat on top of the stack, marked urgent, addressed to Rebecca Collins. The attorney glanced at the return information, then paused, only briefly, but long enough. Irvin noticed. "What is it?" Rebecca looked at the envelope, then at him. "The non-profit board." Her expression changed slightly. Curiosity, surprise, perhaps both. She opened the envelope, read the first page, then looked up. "They've completed their investigation." 6 months later, Irvin Patterson stood on a wooden porch overlooking Minnehaha Creek. The sun had not fully risen yet. Morning mist drifted above the water. The neighborhood remained quiet. Only the distant sound of birds interrupted the silence. A ceramic coffee mug rested in his hand. For the first time in a long time, there was nowhere he needed to be. No court hearing, no attorney meeting, no evidence review, no accusations waiting on the other side of a phone call. Just morning, simple, ordinary, peaceful. The small house behind him wasn't impressive. 2 bedrooms, a detached garage, a narrow backyard, nothing anyone would feature in a luxury magazine. Irvin liked it immediately when he saw it, perhaps because nobody would ever mistake it for a status symbol. The place felt honest, and after everything that had happened, honesty carried unusual value. Inside the garage sat the beginning of his new business, Patterson Security Consulting. The company started small, very small, a folding desk, 2 laptops, a printer, a handful of local clients. But it was his, entirely his. The idea had formed during those long weeks in the motel, back when every day revolved around timelines and surveillance records. He knew security systems. He understood investigations. He understood evidence. Eventually, people started asking for help. Then referrals appeared. Then contracts. 1 project became 3. 3 became 7. The business grew slowly, steadily, the way durable things usually do. A movement near the driveway pulled him from his thoughts. A pickup truck rolled to a stop. Irvin recognized it immediately. Ethan Caldwell. The truck door opened. Ethan climbed out, holding a paper bag from a local bakery. Some habits never changed. The 2 men had spoken several times since the divorce became final. Not frequently, not deeply, but occasionally. Enough to rebuild communication. Not enough to erase everything. Ethan approached the porch. "Morning." "Morning." He handed over the bag. Blueberry muffins, the same kind they used to buy during community college. Another old habit. They sat quietly for several moments, watching the creek, watching the sunrise. No rush to fill the silence. Some friendships work that way. Eventually, Ethan spoke. "I've been meaning to say something." Irvin already knew where the conversation was heading, not because he was especially perceptive, because certain conversations become inevitable. Ethan stared toward the water, then continued. I should have trusted you sooner. The statement arrived without excuses, without qualifications, without conditions. Just honesty. Irvin appreciated that, more than elaborate explanations. Ethan continued. I knew who you were. His voice remained calm, and I still doubted. The admission clearly cost him something. That mattered. People rarely enjoy confronting their failures, especially moral ones. Several seconds passed. Then Irvin nodded. I know. Nothing more. No lecture, no punishment, no attempt to maximize guilt. Just acknowledgement. Ethan looked relieved. Not forgiven completely, but heard. There was a difference. The friendship never returned to what it once was. Some things don't. Trust often rebuilds differently than before, smaller, stronger, more realistic. Irvin accepted that. Life rarely restores things exactly as they were. Sometimes it creates something new instead. After Ethan left, the morning continued quietly. Work calls, client emails, routine tasks, the kind of normal life that once felt impossible. Later that afternoon, Rebecca Collins called. The attorney sounded more relaxed than usual, almost cheerful, a rare occurrence. Got a minute? Sure. I thought you'd want an update. Irvin sat down at his desk. What kind of update? The nonprofit board. That chapter felt distant now, almost like something from another life, yet consequences continued moving. Slowly, methodically, Rebecca explained. The investigation had concluded months earlier. Charles Bennett formally resigned from all leadership positions. Several board policies were rewritten. Internal compliance procedures changed. Multiple individuals received disciplinary findings. Not criminal, not sensational, just accountability. The sort that arrives through administrative systems rather than headlines. What about Vanessa? The question left his mouth before he thought about it. Rebecca paused briefly, then answered. She's no longer employed there. Irvin nodded. The information produced surprisingly little reaction. No satisfaction, no anger, nothing. Because by then he understood something important. Consequences belong to the people who created them, not the people who exposed them. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Irvin returned to work. Another ordinary afternoon. Another ordinary day. Exactly what he wanted. A week later, another unexpected call arrived. This one from Olivia Grant, the bartender, the witness, the woman whose testimony helped expose the entire setup. Her voice sounded noticeably different, lighter, less burdened. She had accepted a management position with a hospitality company in Denver. Better pay, better opportunities, a fresh start. I'm calling because I never really thanked you. Irvin frowned slightly. For what? For not treating me like I was part of it. The answer surprised him, because he never considered treating her differently. Olivia had made a mistake, then corrected it. That mattered. Many people never reached the second step. They spoke for several minutes, then ended the call. Another chapter closing, another life moving forward. Winter eventually approached Minneapolis. The creek behind Irvin's house froze gradually. The trees stood bare. The mornings became colder, yet life remained remarkably calm. One Saturday morning, he opened an old storage box. Inside sat dozens of items from the marriage. Photographs, greeting cards, receipts, travel brochures, memories, fragments, evidence of a life that once existed. He looked through them quietly, not with bitterness, not with nostalgia, simply observation, the same way he examined everything else. Then he closed the box, carried it to the garage, and placed it on a shelf, not discarded, not displayed, simply stored, where it belonged. The past no longer needed daily attention. One final message arrived near the end of the year, a short email from Rebecca. Subject line, case closed. Nothing more, no attachment, no explanation, just those two words, case closed. Irvin stared at the screen for several seconds, then smiled. A small smile. Private, brief, real. The following morning, he woke before sunrise, carried a mug of coffee onto the porch, and watched the first light appear above the creek. Months earlier, people looked at a photograph and decided who he was. They looked at a cropped image and ignored the missing pieces. They trusted noise over evidence, assumptions over facts, stories over records. But cameras remembered, logs remembered, timelines remembered. The truth never rushed. It never shouted. It never begged for attention. It simply waited. And eventually, when enough records aligned, it answered every question. The water below reflected the rising sun. The neighborhood slowly came to life. Another ordinary day began. And for Irvin Patterson, ordinary felt like victory. Some of the hardest moments in life happen when people decide who you are before they know the truth. Rumors move fast. Assumptions move even faster. In Irvin Patterson's story, what saved him wasn't anger, revenge, or a louder voice. It was patience. It was documentation. It was the discipline to let facts do their work. Most people will never find themselves in a courtroom surrounded by surveillance footage and legal records. But many people have experienced being misunderstood, judged unfairly, or blamed for something they didn't do. When that happens, the temptation is always the same: react immediately. Fight every accusation. Prove yourself to everyone. Yet sometimes the strongest response is building your case carefully while emotions burn themselves out. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where people believed a lie before they heard your side of the story? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to tell us your country and local time. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe. Tomorrow's story involves a trusted business partner, a missing contract, and a mistake that changes everything.